everyone, and welcome to our next episode of Big Data Talks, in which we have conversations with industry experts on the way in which data, machine learning, and artificial intelligence is changing the way we live. My name is Jan-Willem, and I will be your host today. I'm the author of the Enterprise Big Data Framework, which is hosting this series of Big Data Talks. You can always watch back the recording of this discussion on YouTube, the Big Data Framework website, and the podcasting platforms on Apple Podcast. Today, I have the immense pleasure to introduce Brent Dykes, who's the founder and chief data storyteller at Analytics Hero LLC. Brent has worked in enterprise analytics for almost 2 decades as an analyst, consultant, manager, and evangelist. He has worked with cutting-edge analytics vendors like Adobe, Omniture, and Domo, and has a broad client base of some of the largest companies in the world. Besides that, Brent is a published author and also shares data-related insights and is a Forbes contributor. He's written a number of books about which we're definitely going to talk today. Brent has a master's degree in marketing and is also a degree from Bringham Young University. Welcome, Brent. It's an absolute pleasure to have you on the show today. I'm super excited to talk to you. Follow you on LinkedIn so I can see all of your insights being shared on almost a daily basis.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
Absolutely. So when I was preparing for today's session, I saw that you had a degree in marketing, and today you are in data storytelling and data specifically. So my first question that came to mind was, how did you transition in this career, and what made you so interested in data throughout your professional career?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I think it starts in my undergrad. So I went to Simon Fraser University in Canada, and I was deciding on I was in the business program, so I was in the business administration program, and I needed to decide what my concentration would be, and I was deciding between accounting and marketing. And for a lot of people would say, oh, those are kind of like not exactly similar. And it was because I did well in my accounting classes, so I was good on that side. And obviously, there's a lot of job security in accounting that many people told me I should pursue. But my heart and my passion was really attracted to marketing. And one of the things I really liked about marketing was consumer behavior, which is really the combining psychology with just how people buy and shop. And I really found that compelling and interesting. And my father he worked in public relations. And so I had some exposure to marketing through him. But I made that fateful decision to rather than going into accounting, I went marketing. And at the time when I was graduating from university, there really wasn't a lot of options on the data side in marketing. I talked to another fellow marketing student who graduated around the same time as me. And when she talked to her marketing professor, they were talking about market research, right? Because that's really where you do data with marketing. And he called that the way to make the least amount of money in marketing. So, and I think that was kind of my opinion too, that it really didn't have a lot of respect, didn't feel like it was really the area that, was the popular area of marketing. So I went into marketing communications, and then the .com stuff happened, and I felt like I didn't get laid off. I was pretty lucky that way. I was working for a web design agency, but I felt like my career options at that time were pretty limited, and I wanted to go back and do my MBA. And so then when I went to Bringham Young University down in the United States from Canada, I went down there with my family, and I got an internship where I got some exposure to data. I was able to work on a paid, this is right when Google, this is like 2003, summer of 2003, Google had just announced its Google AdWords. So paid search was like a brand new thing. And I was basically managing a paid search campaign or whole, that channel for the employer that I was working for. And so that gave me an opportunity to really analyze the data and play with the data and kind of also combine that with marketing. And I thought that's really the sweet spot for me, where I could work on data and I can do creative work as well.
Yeah.
And then when
did you first realize that in marketing, because today everything in marketing is data driven, every click you do on any website is analyzed, and basically all of the behaviors online are completely tracked. When in that journey did you kind of for the first time realize, hey, marketing is fundamentally going to change because of data?
Yeah, I think I kind of saw that evolution happen. I was in it because when I graduated from the MBA program, when I went back, I took a job at Omniture, which was one of the first web analytics agency or vendors out there competing with Website Story and Web Trends, and if anybody's familiar with those. Later on, Adobe acquired Omniture, but really I felt like the emergence of data within marketing, because this whole digital marketing thing, not that, I mean, you know, if we think about email marketing and direct marketing, that's still very data driven, but I would think that it wasn't really, you know, for some companies that just wasn't even something they would do, because they, you know, if they weren't a catalog retailer or if they didn't have a big emphasis on mailing or email, then that wouldn't be a big focus. But once you have websites and you have online campaigns and, you know, display ads and paid search ads, I mean, I think the maturity level of marketers with data just, you know, it just blew up. And today, you know, you see how data driven, you know, a lot of marketing teams, you know, at least they have the tools. Whether or not they actually follow through on the data driven side is another question, but definitely they have a world in which there's a lot of data and a lot of emphasis on data.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's very interesting to see that over your career, you kind of progressed from marketing more towards the data side of things. If you think back with hindsight nowadays, because when I went to university, there was no courses in, let's say, machine learning, big data, all that was kind of not there. And sometimes I wonder with myself, if I were, let's say, 16 or 18 again, would I not make a different choice and start a career right away in data? If I were to ask you the same question, if there would have been these kind of programs available when we were young, would you have switched with what you now know?
I think I would have. You know, I think, you know, if I could time warp back and, you know, take all of the excitement around data and analytics. I mean, when I graduated from university, there was no such thing as analytics. You know, it really didn't exist, at least, you know, the way it is today. And so I think the ability to kind of, you know, I'm a very curious person by nature, and you know, obviously I started out my career on the business side, and I think that's been one of the benefits that I had. You know, I think a lot of people start with a technical degree. They start on the, you know, they have a data science degree, or they have a some kind of other, you know, math, stats background, STEM background, and that's great. I mean, these are, you know, if you have that, you're really, really smart and very capable. But I think that does give you a little bit of a blind spot to the business side of things, you know, and coming from a marketing perspective and understanding how that's why I was hired at the Omniture, because we basically are offering web analytics, which is a form of marketing analytics, right? So all of the clients that we were working with were marketers, digital marketers. And so I could relate to them. I knew what they were trying to do, and you know, at least I could think in their mindset, and that gave me an advantage over maybe some people who are more technical and had the, you know, programming skills or the statistical skills, but really didn't understand why they were doing what they were doing. And that was an advantage throughout my career in analytics, is that it was very easy for me to kind of grasp why we were doing certain things and ask questions when we didn't know why. You know, like that's like, why are we doing this? What result are we trying to drive? What outcome are we trying to drive with this? You know, how are we going to make things better? I mean, that's just kind of built into how I approach analytics. And sometimes the curse of knowledge, you know, I kind of assume everybody thinks that way, but I'm reminded over and over again as I consult with different companies that, you know, maybe the way I approach it isn't the way that everybody approaches it.
Yeah, well, I think what you're bringing up is a very valid point, and especially around that business insight, which is still a requirement. So now that we're moving more towards a data-driven world and everyone is more focused around the stats and the math and all of the technical aspects, do you think, or just from your experience, do you see that lack of skills, especially in the business side, is something that we would need to address?
Are you saying on the business side that they need the data literacy skills, or are you saying that the data people need the business literacy skills? It's probably both, right? The data people need to get the business literacy and understanding that perspective. But yeah, I think on the business side, definitely there are, I've run into situations where people don't fully understand the data, don't know how to use it. That's one thing that, so I focus a lot on training people how to communicate with data through data storytelling, but I've also had companies come to me, and I'm actually talking to another company right now about this, but training people on how to interpret data. So a couple of years ago, I had a client come to me and they said, we love your data storytelling stuff, but what we need help with is our managers. We have managers and directors in our company, and we're building them dashboards, we're providing them with reports, but they don't know what to do with them. They don't know how to interpret them. They don't know how to use them. And most importantly, they don't know how to leverage them for business, decision-making. They're not using the data in their decision-making. And so I built a course around how do you interpret data and just, trying to extract out of my brain how I process it and go about it. And then hopefully teach people how to, if these are, I think more and more managers are being exposed to data, expected to leverage data in their decision-making in their daily roles. And so, yeah, that's great. We can create a really great dashboard, or we can do amazing things with getting the right data, really relevant, but it can fall on its face if the managers don't know how to utilize that data. And data literacy is a part of that too. Aside from interpreting the charts and making sense of the numbers, at a very basic level, I think there's some basic data skills that are needed to work with data, right? We absolutely. If you're trying to read and work with English, and English isn't your first language, or you don't know how to speak the language, that's going to be very hard for you to be successful. So.
Absolutely. And you're already referencing it. One of the main things I want to talk and pick your brain about in the next few segments is data storytelling. First of all, as many of our listeners will know, is you wrote a book on this. So maybe in a nutshell, can you explain to people who are unfamiliar or might hear what data storytelling is for the first time today? What is it? Why is it relevant? And what did you describe in a brief summary in your book?
Yeah, so let me set up why data storytelling is important. And I think the main reason is, and this is something I've written an article about this on Forbes, and I talk about the analytics marathon, okay? And what I found just in consulting with different companies around the world, different industries, large, small, medium, is that I found that there was a problem with how people were driving value from their investments in analytics. And so the way I've kind of looked at it is everybody's collecting data today, right? That's not an issue. Everybody's collecting data. Whether or not that data is good quality or the right data, okay, that could be a question, but arguable. But everybody's collecting data, right? So no company's going to say we don't have any data. Or at least companies that matter are not going to say that. So I'd say 100% of companies are collecting data today. Then, there's probably a small drop off for companies that are actually preparing and processing that data, actually getting into a usable format. So let's say, okay, we're going now from 100% to say 80% or something like that. And then the next step that I see a lot of companies are doing is, okay, we got to visualize this data. We got to get reports, dashboards. We got to start getting this information out there. And I'd say a lot of companies are doing that. 70% of companies are doing that. Then I see a cliff. And that cliff is that a lot of companies are not analyzing their data. So I would say there's only probably about 30% of companies that are actually doing regular analysis of their data beyond just like answering questions that occasionally get ad hoc questions that get thrown over the wall. So then we have a drop off. And then from there, the next step would be, okay, so we found something in the data, something interesting. We found an insight. And I define an insight as, I use Gary Klein, who's an author and psychologist. He defined it as an unexpected shift in the way we understand things. For me, that was the best kind of simple definition of an insight. So we have this insight, and this insight is precious, right? We found something. Maybe there's a new customer segment that's untapped that we found, or maybe we found that there's a key step in our process that's broken that we need to fix right away.
Yeah.
We found this insight. We thought things were working with the process, but actually our analysis showed that there's this key problem here, and we have a solution. We have a recommendation. Now, what happens is a lot of times there's another cliff here where half the insights, or maybe even more than half the insights, are not being communicated clearly in a manner that's, persuasive, that's clear, that can be understood by the decision makers. And so we lose this precious insight. It goes astray. It gets lost in the noise of data and maybe our excitement to share it with people, and we don't do a good job communicating it. And then if we not communicating it, the last step of this analytics marathon, the last stage here, is that we're actually taking action on that insight, which I consider the finish line of the analytics marathon. If we're not acting on our insights, then we've got a big problem. So really, it's how do we connect the analysis, we found something, with actually driving action. That's where the data storytelling comes in. It enables us to communicate insights. And I say there's three key pillars to data stories. There's obviously the data, right? So we have an insight, we have relevant, meaningful information that's valuable to the audience that we're presenting it to. We have a narrative. And a narrative is much more than just the words or the messages that we're wrapping around the insights, but it's actually the whole structure of how we bring together and construct a communication that's going to be compelling. We as human beings we've been telling stories to each other for millennia, thousands of years. And so now we kind of, and this is something I talk about in my book, that our brains are kind of constructed now, it's in our DNA to kind of look for stories. We're trying to make sense of the world around us. That's what our brains are doing. And whenever we put something in a story format, it's going to go a lot further than it will if it's just, facts and data and figures and maybe, and then obviously
this for my personal interest, because I fully agree with you, especially on a story always sticks to mind. Whether it's a story you read in a book as a child, or companies that present the story as, we started out in our garage and then we became this multi-billion-dollar company. What is the I'm not a psychologist, and I don't obviously know a lot around data storytelling to the extent that you do. Mm-hmm. So why is that the case? Why do stories resonate with us compared to the facts and dry figures that we see on spreadsheets?
Well, I think it goes to the way that we process information. We have our brains have. Have you read the book by Daniel Kahneman, The Thinking Fast and Slow? Have you heard of that book? Yeah. Not. It's a very thick book, and it's actually, I think it's on the top 10 list of books that are started but never finished. But it's
I also
a very
have
good
to
book.
say that I'm not quite sure whether I completely finished it.
I didn't completely finish it either, but I got tremendous value from what I read from the first several chapters. But in his book, he talks about System 1 and System 2. System 1 is the intuition. It's the unconscious mind processing information, it's obviously trying to handle all kinds of stimuli coming at it all at once. And what it's trying to do is make sense of it, right? It's trying to say, okay, here's a heuristic, here's a pattern. It's trying to, it's like pre-processing, right? For our conscious brain. And that's why we have bias. That's why we have cognitive bias in our minds, because we're kind of taking shortcuts and we're making kind of generalizations and different things based on, what we've learned over thousands of years. And that's where stories are formed right there in that System 1. And System 1 has a tremendous influence on System 2. System 2 is our conscious analytical processing of information. And, in the book, he shares different examples of how he calls system 2 the lazy controller. It basically will listen to system 1, and often, that's where it gets tripped up or mistaken. But it does rely on system 1 a lot, and that system 1 really likes stories, because what does a story do? It, rather than having a bunch of random data points being given to it and it's trying to make sense of it, we package it up in a story. That it's like this prepackaged. We've already made sense of something. We've come out with a coherent, plausible explanation for what's going on. And so that's why we love stories, because it's like, oh, okay, now the work that our audience's brains need to do, we're helping them. We're making it easier for them to process the information, and not only process it and understand it, but also it becomes more memorable. It's also more persuasive. And another thing that I think a lot of people don't realize about how we make decisions, and this was a surprise to me too when I started in my career, coming out of MBA school, I assumed that if I did an analysis and I came up with some logical findings and really argued a rational, made a rational argument for a certain decision, I give that data to a decision maker, and that's all they need, right? I really looked at the logic and the reason as the main drivers of decision making, and I neglected or overlooked the power of emotion and the role that emotion makes in decision making. And when neuroscientists looked at the role that emotion plays in decision making, they realized, oh my gosh, this really has a stronger role in decision making than even reason or logic. And there was a great example he's a neuroscientist at USC by the name of Antonio Damasio. Okay. And he worked with patients that basically had damage to their emotional centers. So they would look like normal individuals to your eye, but when you start to talk to them, the interesting thing that he found as he was interacting with these patients is that they had a hard time making decisions. And a simple example that he shared was, okay, let's set up a lunch appointment. I want to check in with you, see how you're doing. Let's pick a place to go have lunch together. And so, if we were in the same town together, it would probably take a minute or two. We could come to a decision on where to eat for lunch or go to lunch. But these individuals, what they would do is because it's all logic and reason, they have no emotion in their thought, how they're processing information. They basically would then look at each alternative and debate back and forth, and it would take them 20 minutes, 30 minutes to come to a conclusion on where they should go to lunch. Because they'd say, well, the sushi place has the specials I like on Tuesday, but then again, the Italian place it's easier for parking. But then again, the sushi, the servers at the sushi place are much friendlier than the ones at and so they go back and forth.
So they overanalyze.
And so the emotion is actually a key part of how we make decisions. It helps us to make faster decisions. And, and that's, again, another thing, that's another powerful thing about narrative is that we're connecting with that part of the brain, the emotional part of the brain that's making decisions.
So would you say that, to kind of expand on that a little bit, would you say that a good data story is basically the facts and the data plus emotion? Or is that oversimplifying things?
I mean, we bring in some emotion, right? When we form the story, and there is actually a specific story arc that we're looking to. And if you think of a traditional story, it's going to start with a setting. You're going to kind of give context into the characters, and then something's going to happen. And that's called an inciting incident in a story, where there's something unusual happens to one of the main characters, and then that begins their journey. And then you build from there. You have rising action up to a climax, which is the main piece of action or outcome that happens. And then you have a kind of a resolution and conclusion after that. So we can mimic that same kind of arc in our storytelling. Now, our climax of our data stories is an insight. An insight that is, going back to my definition I shared, an insight is an unexpected shift in the way we understand things. So this is big opportunity. I call it the aha moment in my book. I call this climax the aha moment, where we're sharing this big insight that, could mean that, oh, now we need to change how we do marketing, or we have to introduce a new product, or we need to stop spending on that program, or whatever that big insight is. And it's not just the insight alone, it's the so what that goes with it. I kind of look at the aha moment as a major insight combined with the so what. And the so what is this going to make us money? Is this going to cost us money? Is this going to save us money? Is this, why does this matter? Typically, you can put that in dollars. I also work with clients that don't like to think in dollars. And so that might be, especially in healthcare, they don't like to think about money, but so that's better patient outcomes, or, there's other things that they value as kind of their main drivers. And so then we quantify what that is. And so that becomes the climax of our story. Now we also have a hook. And so in this arc that we have, and the way I talk about the hook or the inciting incident of a data story is you obviously want to provide context. You want to establish this is typically what we see in our, in our markets, in these markets at this time. This is the expected kind of typical results that we see, but we want to show you this. Look at what happened here. This metric went up significantly, or this metric went down significantly. Something happened, and then that's where you start to hook in your audience, because they want to know, well, what happened? What caused that jump in that metric, or that decrease in that metric? Can you help us understand it? And in some cases, it's even the audience themselves that may have come to you. They looked at the dashboard and they said, "Whoa, what's going on here? Can you help explain?"
So is that playing to people's curiosity?
Yeah, I mean, I think definitely data should be, if we've got the right data, it should become curious. It should make them curious, because we've got relevant data in front of them that they care about. And so, definitely there's a curiosity there. As we tell our stories, there might be fear that we're inciting because, there's a competitor that now's, entering into our market that we didn't know about, and looks like they're making a significant investment. So, maybe we're playing to the fear, or maybe we're playing to, we can even do suspense or tension, right? We're building tension up to that big aha moment. And so there is a component of emotion involved, and definitely just, that's how we work. We are not robots. We are not, we have emotions.
That's absolutely what's going to make us human, and the appeal that we have from an emotional perspective, I think, is always going to be more powerful than whatever any machine can do.
Right.
Suppose that I'm listening right now. I'm starting to get convinced that I should be using more data storytelling in the way that I work things. And let me give a very practical example. Suppose that I need to give a presentation next week to my CEO, and I would like to get either a project funded, or I would like to convince him to take a specific action. And I would like to start using data storytelling for this particular project.
Right.
Then one of the main questions I have, and I'm pretty sure a lot of other people who are listening will probably have that as well, is how do I start that from a very, practical, best practice kind of approach? Because you cannot make it a story around, how do you say, fairy tales and princesses and princes in a corporate setting. So how do I do that on a very practical basis?
Yeah, I mean, I think it goes back to what I talked about, that you should have, what makes a good story as opposed to just maybe a boring story is you don't have an insight. An exciting a data story becomes exciting and interesting because you have a meaningful insight, an actionable insight as part of your data story, right? I've seen some people, and I draw a distinction between observations and insights. So observations are kind of what I've talked about with that hook, right? There's, this went up, sales went up 200%, or our net promoter score increased 25%.
Yeah.
Okay, that's interesting. That's unusual. But have we gotten into the why? Have we gotten beyond the what? And so I think that would be one area that I would say, if you're thinking about getting into data storytelling, I think, and the other element that I didn't mention earlier, I was talking, data is one element, narrative's the second element. The third is visuals, right? Visualization being the way in which we communicate data. I kind of see visuals as a means to an end. The reason why we use visualization in data storytelling is because often we're dealing with complex data, right? And it's hard to process that information without the help of a chart or a graph to really help it communicate the key points to an audience. So the first thing I would recommend is, do you have any insights, or are you just sharing observations?
Yeah.
That doesn't mean that
should I then move that insight, let's say, to the front of so to kind of immediately put it out there and say, hey, this happened, it's super insightful, and this is the reason that we do it? Or should I use your approach if you say, well, you're building up suspense, I'm first going to explain all of the areas around it and what is likely to happen, and then at the end I kind of build up the suspense and say, as a result, this is the insight that we need to move forward with.
And that's something that I get a question a lot about, because I think we've been trained with executive summaries to put the most important information up front.
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
And
that's the reason.
And I think that's a coping mechanism that we've had, because I think we've done such a poor job communicating our insights in a clear manner. And so executives have gotten fed up with us, talking about the methodology that we use to do our analysis. I don't care about your, unless you're presenting to other analysts who need to learn about the methodology probably isn't the first thing you want to talk about when you're explaining your insights, right? And so I'm not, when I talk about data storytelling, I don't mean like you're stepping through everything in your analysis that you looked at that, no, we have a purpose. We have an objective there.
Cool.
Now, going back to your question, would we take that insight and put it up front? Now, that's a question I get a lot from a lot of people, because we've become accustomed to that. Now, if we think about that, let's take a movie that probably everybody has seen. Let's take Empire Strikes Back. Okay.
Yeah.
What is the executive summary of that movie? It is, spoiler alert, and again, if you haven't seen that movie, you don't care. So I'm not going to, I'll say spoiler alert, but the executive summary is Luke Skywalker, or Darth Vader is Luke Skywalker's father. That is the executive summary of that, basically the main point of that movie. Now, does that have the same impact that it has as actually walking, through all the stages and the steps building up to that moment when you learn? No, it doesn't. It's like I've seen people call it the anti-story. Basically, you're killing the story because you're not getting that tension, you're not getting that emotional thing. But it goes beyond that as well. I think the other thing we give up when we jump to the insight is we lose a lot of the context. We lose a lot of the explanation and stepping somebody through they're not doing the analysis that we did, but they're getting the highlights of the analysis, and they're learning why this matters. And they're because if I just gave you the insight without any of the context or the backup information, then there's a chance you could still miss the point and you don't fully understand it. And so I think that's the danger of executive summaries. Now, I have had people tell me, Brent, I love the strategy, but I have audiences that are accustomed to getting executive summaries. So what I recommend in this situation is I talk about something called a data trailer. So imagine the world's worst movie trailer, where you actually give away the climax of the movie with the hook. And so that's what I tell people in my training. I say, okay, if you need to do this, you do a data trailer. Now, the purpose of the data trailer is to pique the interest of your audience to hear the rest of the story. So I'm not just saying, that's it, that's all you're going to do, but you're going to use the data trailer if you have a situation where you think that your audience needs an executive summary type approach. You take the hook, you combine it with the aha moment, you share that, and two things are going to happen. They're either going to say, "Oh my gosh, tell me more," or how do you know it's going to be that much money in cost saving, or how do you how did you get to that conclusion, or something? Then, okay, now we have their attention. Now they're curious, right? So now we've got a captive audience to tell them the rest of the story. Or the flip side is they're like, okay, yeah, no, I don't need to hear anymore. I'm good. Okay, well, good. We saved their time. We saved our time. We're good. We move on to the next thing we want to talk about.
Very good. What I also love, by the way, is while I see you're explaining things, you're actually using data storytelling techniques with Luke Skywalker in order to kind of get the point across. It makes it really stick to mind, and I think that's an example I would definitely like to use one day, because it's so powerful if you're making a comparison to a movie or something that everyone knows about. Immediately kind of makes things more clear, and at least it sticks to my brain immediately. So it's very powerful.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things I think sometimes gets lost on people is that, and I've talked about this on LinkedIn a little bit, but I think people kind of get so tied up in the visualization aspect of data storytelling that they forget that that's not the main focus. What the main focus of data storytelling is storytelling, meaning we are trying to form a story. That means that, hey, we can dip into all kinds of things outside of the visualization and the data. I mean, part of that is a good analogy. How powerful is a good analogy? If you've got, all the time, in the data world that we work in, we're dealing with a lot of complex topics and a lot of complex analysis. And if you can find a really good, compelling analogy, that may be what they're not going to remember your facts and data points. They're going to remember that analogy, like, the juice isn't worth the squeeze. Absolutely. That's a simple one. And so that may be the summary of the whole analysis, that, we could go and spend 15 weeks building that product, but as we know, based on our analysis here, the juice is not worth the squeeze. And that's what people will remember. So
what you're saying, obviously very interesting in the sense that you do need to kind of keep focus on the story itself. That kind of makes me wonder, should you, in order to become a good storyteller, also, let your imagination wander a little bit and read a lot of stories and know how that is done. And the reason I'm asking that is I see behind you some cartoons, and I also read somewhere that you're an avid comic book collector. Does that help you to kind of step outside of let's say, the real world and get immersed in a story to kind of completely outside of the reality of numbers and facts and figures?
So I want to be careful here, because some people will say, storytelling, it's all about making up stuff. No. The foundation of every data story is data, right? So when we're telling data stories, they're based on facts. They are based on the numbers. Now, to your question, can we learn from these other mediums? Can we learn from, comic books? Can we learn from movies? Can we learn from famous, storytellers, both in fiction writing, but also people like Steve Jobs? He was an amazing storyteller. In business, there's all kinds of storytellers, and storytelling is an incredible skill to get. And so, I think we can learn. Like, I think as you start to immerse yourself in some of the techniques and understand the psychology behind storytelling and the effect that it has on us as human beings, you start to notice more, right? You might notice it in your CEO when he's doing a presentation or she's doing a presentation. You might notice it when a vendor comes in and presents to you. You may notice in an article that you're reading and how they're crafting the narrative and bringing in data and things. And so I think as your eyes are open to some of the key principles, you start to notice how it works. And then you can learn from those other storytellers in business or outside of business and apply some of those principles, to what you do. And I think there's lots of really good examples out there. One of my favorites that I recommend, and unfortunately he passed away in 2017, but he did a number of TED Talks and definitely worth checking out. His name is Hans Rosling.
Okay. I'm not familiar, but can you explain it?
So Hans Rosling, he actually he's a doctor by profession, or he was a doctor by profession, and then he was a statistician as well, and then he started talking about very like public health related issues and things, and he has a huge personality and fun, very gregarious and Swedish, and just tells these amazing stories with data. And he was actually featured in a BBC special called "The Joy of Statistics." And in that,
I'm definitely going to watch that.
Yeah, no, and there's a short clip. It's about 4 minutes long where he does. I think that's the title. It's like 4 minutes for like 200 countries and something, and I forget the name of it. I feel bad now, but if you search for it, look it up, and it's a very short clip. It's just 4 minutes long, and he has all these dots showing how health of different countries changes over time, and it's just fascinating to see him, do something like that, and he would be one of my heroes of somebody that I try to emulate.
Do you consider him, like, let's say, the greatest storyteller that you know, or is there another person that you say, well, this is really somebody to look at in order to learn and to see how this person is doing it?
From a data storytelling perspective, yes, he's very good. He's a master. I mean, there's and the good thing is that we have videos and we have lots of presentations that he's done up until his death. And he also wrote a really good book called Factfulness. He wrote it with his son and I think his daughter-in-law. I think they all contributed to it. But yeah, definitely check out Hans Rosling, amazing human being and data storyteller. Absolutely. I would say the other area that I've seen really good work lately from is Vox. And Vox is a news media company here in the U.S. and they've been doing some really, really interesting kind of data storytelling with their journalistic approach, and I think they've been doing some good things there too.
Yeah. So speaking of journalism, one of the things that is, let's say, the trouble over time with the amount of data that we're generating every single day is that, and I think you mentioned it very avidly, is that ultimately data storytelling is still about the data. Mm-hmm. And one of the difficult things that I see, and it kind of is something that I also talked a lot with the other speakers in the podcast before, is because the data is growing so much, it's becoming very difficult to learn what is true, what is not. People tend to be biased towards a certain amount of information. And if you just look at politics, for example, people can make two completely different narratives and two completely different stories based on the same underlying data. Mm-hmm. In data storytelling, how do you make sure that you kind of keep a bit of especially when we're going to talk about emotions, how do you make sure you keep things factual and true?
Yeah, I think part of that is the responsibility of the data storyteller. We have to strive. I mean, it's hard. We are fighting our own cognitive biases. They're hard. We can't just turn off a button and then become robots that don't have any of that. It's the system one that I talked about earlier. Yeah. So I think it's just having checks in place, making sure that we know what our biases are. We may like a particular political party. We may like a particular initiative or something like that, and we have that bias. And now we have to work harder to have an open mind and try and not read things into the data that aren't there. I think that's one of the things that often, I think as I've focused on data storytelling and I look at a lot of the political world that we now live in that's just so, challenging, I think it's because a lot of times and this is based on psychology, we are not going to nitpick data that aligns with our viewpoint. Right. So that's why you see people latch onto these phony websites that purport to have some data on so-and-so's laptop or whatever. and they have all these, that speaks to us because that aligns with our political views. And so we don't question the quality of the data that affirms our viewpoint. However, if we get conflicting information, that's when we become skeptical, right? That's when System 2 engages and said, wait a second, System 1 said that this isn't right. And so I'm going to investigate this closer. So that's the thing we have to be careful is sometimes we find data that aligns with our bias or our perspective, and we don't question where it came from. We don't, that's got to be true because it says what I want it to do. And so I think it's just holding ourselves and those around us accountable. And some people don't want to be held accountable, but I think that's about discipline. That's about having integrity. Trying to maintain an open mind, and you can use you could buy my book and you could use the techniques in my book to manipulate data and trick and deceive people if you wanted to, just like you could with anything else, right? It could be used in a bad way, but as I talk about in the book, and I use a Spider-Man reference, with great power comes great responsibility, right? As we understand the data, we have this power, we understand how to communicate insights in a way, you can use that for bad, but I hope that the readers of my book and people who are interested in data storytelling, that we use this for good, because there's so much good we can do with this. We can bring attention to really important issues and causes, and we can drive value within our businesses and our organizations as we help them to understand different opportunities and problems that need to be addressed. I mean, there's so much good that we can do with this. But
I think I already have the title of your next book, and that is Data Storytelling for Good, because I think that's absolutely a very valid point that you're bringing up, is using there's so much data out there and there's so much opportunity in the world, and that's something that we can definitely use for the betterment of the world in general.
Right. Absolutely.
So Brent, I can talk easily with you for another hour, but we're getting close towards the end of the part. Before I close off, there's always one question that I ask all of my guests, and that is, if there's any student listening right now and they have ambitions to become, let's say, the best data storytelling in the world, is there one piece of advice you could provide to our listeners on the next practical steps that they could take? What would it be? Besides buying your book, obviously.
No. Yeah, I mean, sure, they'll want to buy my books, but no. I would say the one thing is you want to understand your audience, right? I think I think people overlook that it's really important to understand your audience. So if you're a young analyst working in an organization or a marketer or whatever your role is, and you want to become a data storyteller, I think about who are you serving your data stories to, and so that's gonna help you to understand. The more you understand about your audience, the more you're going to understand what's important to them, where you should be focusing your time, how you should be communicating that to them. You could go do some analysis and create an amazing data story, but then if it doesn't connect with your audience, all of that time and effort will be wasted. So I think the first place you need to start before you get heavily into data storytelling is, do I have a good understanding of my audience? Do I understand what problems they're trying to solve, what outcomes they're trying to drive, where are they spending their time and their resources within the company? Are there key metrics that they're that are tied to their goals or their targets that they're trying to achieve? I think that would be a recommendation that I would make to myself, when I was starting my career, if I was starting over.
Thanks, and I think that's a great recommendation to end our show with today. Brent, I want to thank you so much for being part of Big Data Talks. Personally, I learned a lot just by listening to you. I think yourself are a great storyteller, and it has been an absolute pleasure to have you here today. Thanks for sharing your insights, and I hope everyone listening has a completely different perspective now on data storytelling and why it's so important to learn a little bit more about that. Thanks for your participation today.
Thanks, Jan-Willem. Great to be here.